Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 7 of our Seeking Harmony live conversation. Today, we are looking at the universal law of karma. And this topic has evolved out of just feeling into what's happening at a collective level and how our individual choices influence that collective behavior and what that means at a national level, but also at an individual level, how karma influences how we engage with life and how we show up in life and what that brings up in return. And so one of the things that probably stands out for me quite a bit is the sense that there is a built-in accounting system within life. It's literally intrinsic to how life flows, to how we flow with life, to how nations flow with life, and possibly even at the level of how, as a planet, we flow with life. And the fact of the matter is that there's checks and balances. And so those checks and balances serve to balance out life, and they serve to balance out our experience with life. And they also serve to even things out or create that balance. So for me, it's the sense of a very universal accounting system where there's a balance of the debits and credits. And the end result is generally that payment always becomes due. The way we see in our own lives, you can't consume something without having to pay for it, or having to work for it, or having to expend some type of energy in order for that consumption to be enabled. So yeah, just a very high level intro in terms of my perspective on what that universal law of karma speaks to. In my research, I found that there's actually 12 laws that are universal that relate to karma. And one of those is something that we probably all have seen play out or heard about, is the law of attraction that you use in terms of what you manifest in your reality. There's also the law of, let me get this right, there's the law of gender that requires that we balance the masculine and feminine aspects within ourselves. There's a law of cause and effect, which we generally seem to be more familiar with, in the sense that there is always a preceding action to a reaction. It's kind of the spiritual equivalent of Newton's law of motion, which says that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think, and I may have the number wrong, but I think it actually speaks to Newton's third law. But yeah, there's actually 12 laws that form the universal law of karma. And so, yeah, I'm not going to go into all of them, but I just wanted to highlight some of the more familiar ones so that we understand the concept of the fact that there is a universal regulator or regulation mechanism. So having shared that, I'm going to open it up to the team, and just from the perspective of the rule of universal law, the way we almost look at the rule of law in a society, and how it's almost incumbent on us to support that rule of law, and where we don't feel like it's an appropriate law to support, that we actually have the power to influence it and change it, to vote in opposition to it, or to vote to change it. So yeah, it's about the golden thread of what we've been talking about over the last few weeks in terms of the dynamics of power, the fact that we take ownership of our power, and now looking at how that rule of universal law also speaks to that energy of empowerment. Because one of the things about the law of karma that seems to be quite a pervasive thread throughout these 12 laws is that by knowing them, you are empowered to influence your reality. Through your thoughts, through your actions, through your expressions, there is always the dynamic that as a sovereign individual, you have the power to influence your reality. And so inside of the law of karma, your actions determine what comes to you from the perspective of what you give out. And to water it down, it's literally the sense of if you threw a stone into water, it would create ripples. That would ripple outward. But at some point, they would actually encounter various mechanisms that allow those ripples to flow back inwards. So there's always the sense that we influence and we have the power to influence. So yeah, I'm just going to open it up to the team and just talk from the perspective of our power to influence and what that means from a karmic point of view.
So I remember maybe a class in Catholic school when I was 13, where a parent was talking about what we know as karma today, but not in just words, because like it's Catholicism, but she was explaining basically how in heaven, like everyone has some sort of bank. It's like a bank account. And the things that you do add or take from this bank account. And basically, the more you add to your bank account, the more like force and tools you have for your ascension. And if you only take from your bank account, you will have to rebalance at some point. That's how she said it. And I found it cool to realize that this concept was also used in many forms and many religions, and that's something that we see often to explain like the balance of the universe. And so, yeah, I'd say like if you realize that you have this, you realize that you have an influence on the balance of a system or the universe itself, because you are of the universe. And yeah, that's one example. I guess that I had very early on what karma really is, instead of like what people saw it as when I was little, which was like some sort of payback for bad actions only. I found that it's more that the balance of the universe is of love, not of neutrality, and everything that deviates from that comes around, and the universe rebalances itself naturally. So yeah, that was a pretty cool example to explain to kids how it worked. How do you guys, have you guys encountered like other images that made you understand what karma was?
To me, karma is some kind of mechanism on your energy field that tells God and the universe what you've done. And you can read how the universe is responding to you by what people are saying to you or mirroring to you. The energy comes back. So if you've been bad and been doing bad things and sending out bad energy, the universe mirrors that back to you in many different ways. That's not so great karma, and you can like rebalance that by opening up your heart chakra and trying to like love the situation and heal it. And then you know you're on the right track when the world in front of you starts getting more peaceful and more loving, and people are responding back to you in love and kindness.
Sandra, I think you've touched on something important, and it's just to jog my memory of one of the other 12 laws of karma, is the law of vibration. And we have learned it through Jeff and Shaleia's teachings and through our life as life matching the vibration that we're sitting in, and us elevating into that vibration as we heal. And so there's actually a law of vibration that says you need to meet that vibration where it is and heal into it. And if there's a vibration that's reflecting something that you feel is not what you want in your life, it's not about fixing the outside. It's actually about turning your focus inward and seeing how you're actually a vibrational match to what is happening in your reality and what you need to do to transcend it. So yeah, I thought I'd just chuck that in as well, in terms of the, like, you know, I didn't realize firstly that there were 12 laws of that overall make up karma or feed into karma. But now that I've seen it, it just starts to make so much sense that there's always this thread of universal truth to our experience. And in that experience, there's actually literally dynamics within what we think of as karma. And it's not just a simple, almost transactional type of interaction with life. There's so much more that influences it. But yeah, having shared that, I want to just check in with the rest of the team in terms of the question that Yoreen asked you guys.
For me, what I always picture like the recycle sign. I don't know why that comes up, but like I remember there was this meme and it was like what goes around comes around. It was like the recycling sign. But I don't know, it just reminds me of karma, because like it's like your vibration. Whatever you're putting out, you're getting back, right? If you do bad to someone, like that's gonna come back to you somehow, right? And then talking about it also kind of like reminds me of when like Jeff and Shaleia say like, when someone's like leaves the community or something, like they go back to like where they were. And that kind of reminds me of like, oh, like they were actually, this is like their karma, like they're receiving their karma back because like they're doing all these things like in the community, and then once they like vibrated out, then their karma came back to them. So it's like, oh, I had it and then I forgot it because I don't know how to say it, but it was like, do to others what you would like do to yourself, or like treat others how you would treat yourself. And that like reminds me of karma a lot too. So yeah, that's like what I associate with it. And it's interesting because now that we're talking about like vibration and karma, I feel like they're very like connected and very related. And you could possibly say they could be the same things essentially, but I don't know. But that's what I thought about.
Did you allow your thoughts on karma?
I mean, you guys pretty much said it all. Every different perspective of what karma is. I don't think I can really add on top of that unless, well, I mean, I guess you can say it's a mirror, if that's another way to put it. But I think I just mimicked one of you guys. But yeah, that's, yeah, you guys pretty much said it all.
No, I think it's a pretty good analogy, mirror, and yeah, it definitely adds to the fact that this teaching is teaching us all the laws of the universe, and karma is like one very essential part of how it functions. Like, for example, when you prepare your home for a twin flame, it's basically sending out a vibration and a message to the universe that you have arrived at that vibration, or you're ready for that level. And so the cycle speeds up to get you to that level. It's like, it's a very good image of karma that we've been studying for a few years now. So yeah.
Our reality is a manifestation of what's going on in our head. It's not the other way around outside, that we have to fix the outside. We have to fix what's going on in us. That's part of healing.
Yep, you're right about that. And I agree with you. And Grandy also said something about like, we know a few of the laws of karma today, but not a lot. And I think our global system is trying to mimic an exact karma to the best it can. So basically, we have the best we can have right now for like the spiritual level we're at as a society. And you see it in justice, like the balance and in other things basically. But yeah, I think it's important to remember that behind that, cause and effects, action and reaction, there are a lot more things going on that naturally balance the universe and our world. I think we've seen it pretty much with with Russia. It was said to be like the one of the best military forces in the world, like a few weeks ago, basically. And even though Putin made threats about like attacking everyone that would come his way, we know that logically, like basically impossible for him to attack alone a lot of countries. It requires a lot of energy to do that just in Ukraine. But like the force of pushback is had from all of society, all of this reality, basically, is what shows us that karma and divine justice and vibrations, all of these things are very much at work right now, not just the things that are already accepted in our society. So yeah, I'd say like it could have been predictable, but it was still surprising to see how it unfolded, basically, in this current situation. I don't know how you guys see how the conflict turned out, but that's my feeling on it, basically.
So I think, but you've touched on something that I think is actually quite important in terms of what we might have perceived would have come out of pardon, of the situation, and almost as opposed to what we are seeing play out. And I think one of those things is that when we kind of expand the sense of what karma is from an individual level and superimpose it on a nation, for instance, we start to see that at a national level, there are karmic lessons. So one of the things that struck me very interestingly, what I found interesting was that there was the sentiment that there's a lot of misinformation from Russia to the world. But it's also being reflected quite a bit from the sense that there's a lot of misinformation within Russia to each other. So one of the, like the sense that I have is like some of these reports, and we can only surmise the extent of what the truth is there. But like, the fact that certain individuals within Putin's armies are misinforming him about how prepared the army is for this kind of activity. And so, like it just feels like the scales and the balance are almost, in a sense, immediately revealing themselves, in that we don't have to wait for an analysis of what this behavior has been in 5 or 10 years' time. We're kind of seeing a greater sense of that information being shared more immediately to see how that national karma is actually playing out in Russia. And then the other thing that kind of also struck me was just how Germany's national karma has shifted to them actually not being the aggressor, but actually supporting another nation against the aggressor. It's kind of like all these karmic lessons playing out, and you're kind of seeing the dynamics almost real time from almost real time, from a view of what is being shared with us. I don't think that we will always know the full picture, but we can feel the truth of it. We can feel the truth of the reflection of that sense of what national karma starts to look like. We can see the sense of global karma, in that fewer people are choosing to go into battle in the first place. You almost have the sense of that lesson has to an extent been learned, which is another dynamic of what karma is that lessons repeat themselves until, or situations repeat themselves until the lesson is learned. So yeah, I just I want to put that out there and see how you guys feel about what the world is reflecting to us, just in terms of the dynamics of karma. And we don't have to go into the details. It's just kind of like, when you look at it, what dynamics of karma are you seeing playing out right now?
I actually just thought of something. Okay, I want to make sure I'm phrasing this correctly. I've seen a perspective based in Ukraine that I guess maybe I can say, from a perspective, it looks as if the men of Ukraine have not really not value their power, but I get not value. That's not the word I'm looking for. Have taken advantage of their power, if that makes sense, and based in Ukraine. And the karma that I'm seeing played out is the president. How do you say his name? Zelensky? That's how you say it? Yeah. He's banning all men 18 and older to leave the country, to stay and fight in this thing. So that's kind of a bit of karma that I'm seeing, and only because, like I said, from my perspective, it looks as if some men in the Ukraine have took advantage of their power as the lead in their country, being that they don't really value their women in a way. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. But that's just my perspective and opinion.
So I haven't really seen that, but like it would be, I think it's interesting to just look at that perspective of what's actually playing out, because, like it kind of takes us, it requires us to suspend our judgment and look at what is really being shown to us. What is at the core there? And there's always a sense that there's truth to all situations. So in this sense, you kind of have to sit back and ask, what have they given away that is now being taken away? And where are they not actually honoring their power? And does this mean, in terms of what is being played out, that they are actually being encouraged to honor the power that they have and protect their land? So, it's those lessons of, well, what is your power? And how are you going to use your power? And I think one of the things that stood out in the group chat was that response of, and it was kind of, is it silence or violence? That energy. And so, yeah, it's interesting to look at it and now go and kind of unpack it and say, well, what were they silent about that they are no longer silent about? And is this a karmic lesson for their nation?
I see a few of my friends that were in countries that were in the USSR speaking up about it. And I think Ukraine is demonstrating something to all of these nations to finally free themselves from this Cold War energy, because not many of them actually like the communist way of doing things and like being under the wing of Russia and want to not necessarily join Europe, but join a more global world, which angers Russia. And so I think they have been in the dynamic to slowly get away from the abusers, but there are a lot of, because their languages are all very transparent and they all understand Russians, there are a lot of like Russian speaking people that are still attached to the culture. And so I think it is a lesson for them to understand where is the limit. Like, we can share a culture, but maybe it is good to be independent as a nation. It is good to stand in the power. It is good to be more autonomous and less reliable on Russia. And I think that's where their power play comes and plays out. And I remember Jeff saying in his live about Zelensky, which I find true, is that sometimes he acts a lot to and he has a lot of speeches directed to the global community, to the world. And he used to have a little bit of a victim mentality instead of like claiming the whole power, the whole resources of what NATO was sending to him. And I hope they can heal that, because this is the key to being a true powerful nation in a society that is going to build up and go up constantly. And I think, yeah, it's basically an ex-USSR kind of karma, but also I see it as a challenge from God, so that they can grow stronger for what's in it for us in the future, and what they would need to do, and the power they would need to wield as nations. So yeah, that's what I see from all the messages of like free Ukraine and free ex-USSR countries since the beginning of the conflict. And I would say maybe they would have, as men from a Ukrainian culture, maybe they would have to heal some karma about power as well. But I think what is playing out is like way bigger and maybe more complex, or maybe an accumulation of different types of karmas.
Yes, I think you've in that last point, I think you touched on something that I feel is important. And that's, that sense of the karmic debt that nations sit with. And one of the things that we notice as we look at not just what happens in terms of conflicts, but also what happens in terms of elections, what happens in terms of systemic issues within countries, what possibly even happens in relation to systemic issues related to race within countries. And you have to, you kind of look at this and it is the sense for me that as more people ask for things from a place of power, the reality shifts. So letting go of that victim mentality and understanding their sense of belonging and their sense of equality and the sense that they actually have the power to change things. And, just at a global level right now, the one thing that I think is starting to happen is that sense of what used to be superpowers is falling away more. But having said that, there are still those energies of clinging to it, as we can see in the behavior of some of the things happening in this conflict. But overall, there's a greater shift to move away from this sense of superpowers and more towards the sense of more joint power, which is the unity that we're seeing in terms of many of the countries in the United Nations. Also, just the consensus from the countries in the G8 and NATO and those kind of things. We're seeing a lot more influence towards the global sense of shared power, shared resources. And so these places that are clinging to their resources and clinging to their power seem to be more and more isolated. And I'm starting to wonder if that isolation isn't also a karmic lesson at a national level. It's like, it's literally that child on the playground who wants the sandbox to themselves. Eventually, nobody wants to play in the sandbox with them anyway. And eventually, they are not part of that friendship circle. And I know it's a very rudimentary example, but just it puts it in perspective. So I just want to check in with you guys how you feel about that. That child, that the energy of the child who literally wants to own the sandbox.
The child who just doesn't want to share. Yeah.
You made me think of something when you talked. Is that, the USSR was called the Union of Soviet Nations. And I talked about people being confused about being united by culture and being united by nation. And I think that's where they got stuck in the last system and are trying to resist coming into a more modern system that we are seeing right now, is that you don't gain power by being alone in your, or closed in your community by language or culture. You really come together with other countries to decide what is best for our world today. And I think that's something that we've been pointed to, towards the end of Black Lives Matter and the beginning of Seeking Harmony is that the less you see yourself of the system, the more you will have like an unresolved problem with the system, maybe isolation, aggression. And so what if like the big karma was, and every country is experiencing it, but like some more than others, obviously, but we need to come as one to have a system that functions. And yeah, it would seem like being and staying in the old system is like the child's play kind of way of doing it. And now we're growing into a more adult way for where we are. I feel like Drake has something to say.
Well, I was just thinking about COVID and how like the whole world like manifested that, and I think that's an example of karma, of God just being karma just being like, and God being like, hey, all right, well, like we have to humble these people somehow and make them like isolate and like be with themselves. So that's just what I was thinking of, and I was thinking that like it's a good example. That's just what it reminded me of, because and I think it started in China or something, and I was like, well, maybe that was China's karma, because China has some interesting things. I don't quote me on this because I don't know if it's like completely accurate, but I think China has like, or they had a law where you can't have like more than one child, or if you have like a girl, they have to get, I don't know, but it was something like that. So that just made me think of like, oh, maybe that was China's karma or something like that, or that manifested there. But I think that's a thing with the child. Don't know if it's still a law, but I feel like it was a law before. I don't know.
I think you've touched on something important as well, in that energy of COVID, which is something else that I read up on in terms of the law of karma, that there is a law of divine oneness. And so that interconnectedness between us all is actually part of the fabric of what karma is and how it plays out and how it is designed to work. There's actually a universal law that fuels the law of divine oneness. And I feel like, even though we may not be directly sitting in Russia or Ukraine where this conflict is playing out, globally, many nations will be affected by this conflict because of supply and demand, because of the fact that there are significant resources that sit in Russia. Like I think the quote was like 70%, Russia supplies like 70% of the natural gas to the rest of Europe. That's significant. If you just even think about that, gas is generally used in production cycles. Then there's also the fact that over 60% of the wheat supplied to Europe is produced in Russia and the Ukraine. So it becomes very significant because we know wheat is literally a base ingredient for many food items. So, it shifts the perspective quite a bit in terms of, one, the energy of grabbing and holding on to resources that will spill over into affecting the ability of people to feed their families. people to go to work. We see fuel prices climbing. We see all those kind of things starting to happen. We see short supplies from a demand point of view. Like for South Africa, we export significant amounts of fruit and coffee to Russia. That affects the ability of us to use ports to go and deliver, but also to receive certain things from those places. So again, that energy of our connectedness becomes so much more apparent under these circumstances. And it kind of makes me just feel like it's truly being highlighted how interconnected we really are at a very intrinsic basic level.
I'd like to touch a little bit on COVID. It did come from China. It mutated from an animal and it jumped onto a human. And it's kind of like nature's karma for the planet. Hey, you guys, pay attention. You got to take care of the planet better. Got to make sure everything is wholesome and healed. Good water, good air, good everything.
Yes, Sandra, absolutely. And yeah, I wanted to push these thoughts a little more, like it's showing us like our divine oneness for sure. But what if it shows us like our next lessons, for example, like the fact that we don't have gas and wheat and oil and a lot of resources from Russian grounds in Europe will have an impact economically on the world, but there is also a very important like responsibility and a responsibility to respond from the nations. Like, are you going to surrender to fear? And what if we do without Russian resources for a while? Like, what will it highlight for us? I read that Belgium will like push back its climate change plan because it cannot like get out from nuclear power too soon if Russia is not serving gas and oil to the country. But what if it sparked another karmic lesson about how to consume energy better? How to be global, but not global in the sense that we are sending resources to the other sides of the world and basically impacting the climate. And how will we go from the system we have to a system that is more respectful of the environment? Like, all these questions are questions that we have to ask ourselves now, because I'm sure we've seen the documentaries about like how the world will change, and 2030, 2050, it's tomorrow. We are in 2022. So what if we had like divine nuggets and lessons come out of this, and we could say, hey, like maybe we don't have that, and maybe we won't have these resources for a while, but what if you could turn yourself to something that we actually have in abundance that would help us grow in energy and technology without like damaging the environment. And this could be one of many lessons planned for us to learn. Like the fact is we don't really know, but all of this is divinely orchestrated, and we have to trust that we won't die because we don't have wheat from Russia for a while. Like we knew about the situation since 2015, and maybe we're not like completely prepared to have an economic crisis plus COVID, but it will turn out okay, I think, if we take our responsibilities to look into these questions very soon.
I think you've touched on something quite important. Literally, it's a golden thread through what has been, what we've shared around the energy of COVID, and now again, the energy of what this means at the global level. And the fact of the matter is, there's also a law within karma that specifically speaks to being present and paying attention. And these last 3 years has just been literally that. It's been literally sit down and open your eyes and take stock and look at what is actually happening around you. And one of the things that you've shared, Urine, around the lesson is something that I've always observed is that necessity breeds innovation. So the more, and it literally is that the more dire situations become, the faster people innovate in order to move away from those dire circumstances. So again, I feel like it's like this is just again leading into the space of you have power to change it. But you kind of have to actually be present in order to see it, and then be present in order to innovate past it or through it, and then also be present to sustain it. It's a much more global lesson that we've been learning over the last 3 years. We can't say, I don't think there's any way or any person that can say, I wasn't actually personally impacted by COVID. It didn't require me to shift my thinking. It didn't require me to do things differently. I feel like that's the lesson that you and Sandra are speaking to in terms of the design here is actually quite sophisticated in its simplicity. It's like, pay attention and stop your shit, kind of thing. It's literally that energy of go to your room and think about what you've done. And it's not karma, and I think that's one of the things that we need to clarify here is that we have, as children, grown up with the sense that karma is actually almost a law of punishment. And that is not the truth of karma, because it's not stacked against one person or the other, or one type of behavior or the other. The fact of the matter is, the core underlying truth of it is that you reap what you sow. But that doesn't mean that it is specific to good and bad. It's just specific to the power of your actions and your thoughts and your deeds in this world that you experience similar types of things as you progress. And I think the one thing that I wanted to actually share with you guys is that I read that karma plays out at 3 levels. It plays out at an individual level in this life from what you have sown in this life. But you also, if you believe in the law, in reincarnation, that you also bring karma with you. But then there's also the sense that there is karma from your ancestry that also plays out. And so that the law of reincarnation is that you come back to pay off your karmic debt and to shore up karmic wealth. So, you know, there's a lot of dynamic there, but I think the one thing that was quite important was just to kind of debunk the myth that karma is a law of punishment, because it's actually not. And I feel like that's, for me, that's been my greatest sense of when I started learning about this concept of karma. You know, like when you get taught when somebody does something bad, oh, their karma will find them. You know, we say those kind of things, not quite knowing what we're talking about, until we start to unpack it, and we're like, hey, is that what it actually means? So yeah, it was good. It was just interesting to just look at the comparative there and just like really realize that actually it's not a law of punishment. It's not meant to stack up against one person or the other, or one situation or the other. It is literally a cosmic accounting system.
You saying that made me think of what came up for me when you asked your first question earlier about what we thought about what karma was. The first thing that came up to me was karma's a bitch. And I was like, wait, that's not true. Why would I think that? So I had to check myself. So I said, no, that's a poverty survival, like bottom of the barrel way of thinking. So I said, okay, wait, that's not the mindset. So I said, okay, let me hear everyone else's, and then I'll say my part. Yeah.
Yeah, but you see, it's those kind of things that we get socialized with, and we inadvertently internalize it without realizing that we've internalized it. So a conversation like this is really cool to go like, well, actually, what's at the core of it? And is that actually the truth of it? And yes, we use things like karma as a bitch, and the wheel turns, and you will get what you deserve, and all those other things. And I think the best example for me is just that you reap what you sow. And it's something that Drake also shared earlier in terms of, it's kind of that energy of, wait, let me just get this right. It's kind of that energy of, I think what you said was, Drake, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost that what goes around comes around kind of energy. And so, yeah, you know, it's literally that balance, those checks and balances, as opposed to literally this punitive energy that we are actually almost trained to fear. And so, yeah, it's good to debunk it and to just kind of go, well, actually, that's kind of crap. Like there's more dynamics in play here, and it's kind of incumbent on us to understand those dynamics. And it's not to influence it in a way that says, okay, now you must live your life in this way. It's kind of awareness. Awareness is probably more powerful than non or unawareness. So yeah, you know, that's just my thought on it. So I just want to check any last thoughts from anybody before we close. We are almost reaching our hour.
Good karma, if you've been good and you've been loving people and healing people, good karma comes back to you as the universe talking back to you and telling you you did good.
Good. Thanks, Sandra. And yeah, thank you to everybody else that's joined us. Thanks to the team for the conversation. We invite you guys to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you'll find all our previous conversations. And we look forward to seeing all of you next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.